Your Excellency Hedegang, representative of the government of the People's Republic of China, Your Excellency Ambassador Martin Impana, the Dean of Diplomatic Corps, Excellency Dr. Changde Li, representative of Resident Coordinator, Excellencies, colleagues, ambassadors, heads of international organizations, members of Diplomatic Corps, dear friends of Rwanda here present, fellow Rwandans, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me begin by thanking all of you for taking time to join us on this 31st commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. It is indeed very fulfilling and comforting to always have you on this day as you remember and honor the victims of this terrible tragedy. Every year on 7th of April, Rwandans of all walks of life residing in Rwanda and those living around the world congregate together with their friends in a somber commemorative event in remembrance of the victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. This commemorative day has been designated both by the United Nations and AU as the day to remember the victims of this tragedy. This is indeed a moment of deep reflection, a moment of looking back, and an occasion to comprehend and ask ourselves about what transpired, why it took place, and how it happened. The horrific atrocities in 1994 genocide against the Tutsi were orchestrated and carried out by the state. It is extremely important to point out that the genocide is a crime that is committed with the intent, mark the word intent, to exterminate in whole or in part a people because of who they are, how they look like, where they live, and what they believe in. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and follows preconceived and systematic planning by the state. This is exactly what happened in Rwanda for many years, the apex of which was the genocide against the Tutsi that we are commemorating today, which happened between the 7th of April and July 1994. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for those not very familiar with the history of Rwanda, allow me the latitude to highlight a few things. In the early 1900s, the Catholic white fathers, missionaries, I'm also a Christian, but that's what happened, followed by the Belgian colonialists in 1916, driven by racist ideology, and I'll come to that later, introduced the seeds of hate and divisionism to entrench their colonial power through divide and rule policy. When they arrived in Rwanda, they found a very peaceful society of people categorized in social classes defined by their occupation. Tutsi were predominantly cattle keepers. Hutus were involved in crop production, while were artisans. Because Rwandans are one and the same people. They speak the same language. They have similar culture. They practice the same traditions. This definitely defeats any notion of ethnicity. Because in the absence of any scientific description of ethnicity, what Belgian colonialists did, they opted to use measured physical features. In the absence of any scientific description of ethnicity, because the language is the same, people look alike, same traditions, so the only way they could be divided was through measuring their physical features. And I think those who had an opportunity to tour the photo gallery, they saw the famous picture where a man's nose was being measured. And they used sophisticated instruments like vernier calipers for ethnic identification. Those with the long nose were described as Tutsi. With the short and wide nose were identified as Hutu and Twa. But one interesting aspect of this rather ridiculous criteria of ethnic classification was the number of cows owned by a person. If you owned more than 10 cows, you are considered to be a Tutsi. If you had less, you are considered to be a Hutu. And now I'm trying to imagine if you lost your cows, what happens? The next day you switch to another ethnic group. But that's why I highlighted that one. It's quite ridiculous. But much as this sounds very bizarre and ridiculous, the ethnic identity cards were issued based on these unscientific and what many people and scientists and social sciences have called constructed identities. They are constructed because they are based on physical measurements, and you can have one family of 5 siblings with different physical features, and then based on the measurements, they'll be from a different ethnic group. And this resulted into decades of long ethnic-based hate and ideology of division instigated, taught, and spread by the colonial administration. Now, as the demand for the self-rule grew across the African continent, the Rwandans, that time was a monarch, joined the movement to demand for independence. While the many other colonial powers were winding up to leave, the British and others, Rwanda was very unfortunate. The Belgians didn't want to leave without installing an administration that was going to continue with the same ideology of divisions. So they created and sponsored extremist political parties that carried out the massacres of 1959 and 63 of many Tutsis, which is, in many books, is considered to be unrecorded or recognized genocide. forcing thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them into exile. And we have to face the history. This was done under the supervision of Belgian military officers. Now, in 1962, Rwanda becomes independent. We have the new government. People are supposed to be rejoicing and celebrating because they're independent. But unfortunately, the First Republic, 1962 to 1973, and the Second Republic from 73 to 94, they upheld the same policy. Because you will see in the photo gallery that the ethnic identity cards were issued up to until when the genocide took place in 1994. And what we get out of that is the genocide. But ladies and gentlemen, as I indicated earlier, genocide is not a spontaneous crime. Because we have had cases where people, all lives are the same, but for a genocide to be defined as such, there are phases that have to be recorded. There must be a conspiracy to murder. And it is driven by the ideology of hate hatched by the state. For a genocide to happen, it has to be done by a state through identity politics. They create, as it was said earlier, the phenomenon of us and them. You begin to build in the minds of your people that they are them and we are us, whatever definition you give them. You classify them, and that's what the whole point of measuring, to know who is who, so that they are classified. And then you begin to dehumanize the victims to be. So you prepare the minds of the perpetrators that by the time the killings happen, those are no longer human beings. In Rwanda, this is what happened for many years, as I just explained. So the Tutsis were described as enemies, our enemies. They are them and they are our enemies. And they are not human beings, by the way. They are cockroaches and snakes, like what Stephen Smith explained in the video, that the same mechanism, different history, but the same mechanisms and the similar atrocities. Now, in 1994, on 7th of April, the genocide starts full scale across the country, and 1 million people killed in 3 months or 100 days. But the pace at which these horrendous killings took place was staggering. Because to kill 1 million people in 3 months, it is estimated, and this is based on research, that every single day, 10,000 people were killed, especially the Tutsi and the Hutu who opposed the genocide. The nature and methods used were shocking and disturbing, to say the least. The entire state machinery and security apparatus, together with well-trained and armed militias, carried out these killings using mostly rudimentary weapons, machetes, clubs, spears, bows, you name it. But modern weapons, especially hand grenades, were used to kill where many people were crowded, hiding in churches, in schools, and public buildings. And the killers strode across every hill and mountain and valleys, killing everyone as long as they were Tutsis. As it was said, they didn't spare babies, the old, the young. And the most chilling aspect of this killing stand out. You know, the idea or the ideology to exterminate drives you to make sure that you kill every single being. So the most chilling part of this is when the mothers who are pregnant, their own wombs were opened to make sure that even unborn babies are also killed. The other one is taking young babies who could not even speak a language and bang them, their heads against solid walls. And the one that also is so disturbing is from Console's testimony, where they deliberately infected women through rape with HIV/AIDS. The first testimony we got from Console, what he didn't say is that the killers, when they killed the family members, they called someone and said, don't kill this one with machete, bring so-and-so whom they knew that was HIV positive, so that you kill this girl slowly. That's how Console ended up living with the HIV, as she said in her testimony. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, after hearing all this, all the testimonies and the documentary and what you saw, the biggest question that we still answer, we have asked before and we ask now, where were we as members of the international community? Because the genocide against the Tutsi happened in the broad daylight. Because you saw, again, in the documentary, the commander, General Romeo Dallaire, a Canadian who was heading the UN mission in Rwanda, reported severally to the United Nations, but also to countries, the powerful countries, the countries that matter, that could take decision to stop these killings. But his appeal was ignored. He had around 5,000 troops. He was told, please immediately reduce the number from 5,000 to 270 only, with an exclusive mission to rescue the foreigners only and leave the victims at the mercy of their killers. And the most outrageous and sickening example of this decision to pull out when the killings were at the peak is the case of the Belgian soldiers again. For those of you who have been to Kigali, there's a famous technical school called ETO, École Technique Officielle. We had 2,000 Tutsis who were hiding there, and they were with the Belgian soldiers. So when the decision to pull out came, the militias were surrounding the school chanting, "Kill the cockroaches." So it was very clear and obvious that these people, 2,000 women and children, were going to be slaughtered. It was very clear that because these people were holding machetes and clubs, they had no sophisticated weapons, they were going to be stopped by any uniformed military officer standing in front of the gate. So what happens? The soldiers leave, and within 5 minutes, the militias were inside the school and slaughtered all the 2,000 people who were in that school. Now, this absurd abandonment was by no means the time to surrender. Because now Rwanda is left alone, and the militias are charged, the genocide government is armed, and selfless men and women of the Rwanda Patriotic RPA, led by His Excellency President Paul Kagame, had to march through thick and thin, because this is a rebel movement with very few weaponry, and they could not, of course, do anything except to march in and stop the genocide after the UN troops left. And they were able to stop the genocide at the time when the killings were at their peak. To save our people and save the country from total destruction. As you can imagine, if this small force went in and stopped the genocide and saved the country, it means if the UN troops stayed, this madness was going to be stopped. So in this respect, I wish to pay tribute to our heroes, some of whom paid ultimate price to stop the genocide and make Rwanda what it is today. With this, I wish to ask Colonel Janvier Mujarib to stand up just for recognition. He was part of the campaign against the genocide. As you can imagine, he was young. Then thank you, Colonel, and your fellow patriots. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now indulge me to pose one last fundamental question. After this said and done, have we tried to learn something? Have we learned any lesson from other genocides and Holocaust and the recent one, which is the genocide against the Tutsi? I feel like with a lot of confidence, I can state without fear or favor that we seem not to have learned enough lessons. And I will explain. And I want to request that we listen to this with a sober mind to avoid being distracted by the current geopolitical environment in the region. What is happening in our neighborhood, in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, it is the mirror image of what happened in Rwanda. Because after the collapse of the genocidal force, after the genocide was stopped, those who are carrying out the killings crossed into DRC. Then it was called Zaire. Those of you who visited the photo gallery, you saw the machete, the pile of machete. That was at the border of Tanzania. What Tanzania did was to disarm every single person, military or non-military, who was crossing into Tanzania. Uganda did the same. DRC allowed the soldiers, the militias, intact in their command formation, and crossed over with the same ideology and enough logistics to carry out similar killings in Rwanda and whoever they thought was a Tutsi. And from that, they mobilized and started causing havoc in Eastern Congo, and they mobilized populations to begin the ethnic cleansing in DRC, because you find the Tutsis also in Congo because of our history. This has resulted into hundreds of thousands of killings and many refugees crossing over into neighboring countries, including Rwanda, where they have lived for more than 30 years. And when they went there, they reorganized into different formations, the ARI, the FDR, but the same people who committed what we are commemorating today, they continue to operate in Eastern DRC. Unfortunately, the reason why I posed the question of whether we have learned a lesson or not is the fact that this is happening in the full sight and knowledge of the international community, because we have more than 17,000 troops representing all of our countries in Eastern DRC. This is happening there, and we don't seem to be thinking about the risk of allowing such politics of identity to continue taking place. In fact, if you all recall, last year, my sister Alice Nderitu, Wairimu Nderitu, who was the United Nations Secretary General Special Representative on Genocide, defined the situation in Eastern DRC as a warning sign of societal fragility and proof of the enduring presence of the conditions that allow large-scale hatred and violence. She reminded all of us, the United Nations, that the presence of these militias is a recipe for another genocide. And if indeed we have learned any lessons, why would we allow at the moment, 31 years later, people being condemned to death because they are Tutsi, or Tutsi affiliated, if you like, slaughtered? And you have seen cases, you can go and find out, of people who are being cannibalized, roasted and eaten like chicken because they are Tutsis, and this is condoned by the state organs and the public senior officials at the level of ministers in DRC. And unfortunately, the genocide against the Tutsi story is distorted to fit into current narratives. And the continuation, I want to say this as I close, the continued oversimplification of the situation in Eastern DRC without looking at it from the prism of the lens of the recipe for another cycle of genocide, and making it look like it's a conventional scramble for resources, is misguided and can only serve those who benefit from chaos. Excellencies, as I conclude, Rwanda has seen it all. We have gone through so much. Our people had to endure the reconciliation process where the survivors had to live side by side by the perpetrators for the purpose of reconciling the nation. The government that was put in place in 1994 embarked on the reconciliation journey based on what we call Ndi Umunyarwanda, or in English, I am a Rwandan. The ethnic identity cards were banned because we are all Rwandans, and we don't want to go back into that history, as our president said. So, what we are asking, first, let's make sure that our never again becomes a reality. And let's not wait for the similar atrocities to happen. You know, in 2014, there was a resolution passed by the United Nations calling all nations to fight the genocide ideology, denial, and bring to book the perpetrators of the genocide against the Tutsi. Because, as Dr. Lee said, justice delayed is justice denied. In fact, it emboldens the culture of impunity. So let's work together to bring to book those who committed the genocide, fight the genocide denial because it's used as a cover-up strategy, and create the world which is free of genocide, and the world that's prosperous. Let me close by quoting our president, just to give you hope and the thinking behind this new Rwanda and what we have to do together. I quote, "We cannot turn the clock, nor can we undo the harm caused, but we have the power to determine the future and to ensure that what happened never happens again." Rwanda's story and transformation path is anchored on this wisdom. Excellencies, dear friends, once again, thank you so very much for being with us during this commemoration day. We don't take for granted your presence here. It's a busy day, but this has always been something that you have put on top of the priority in terms of our programs. So we really appreciate and want to encourage you continuing with this kind of spirit to stand with us with the purpose of honoring the victims, but also making sure that this doesn't happen again, whether it is Rwanda or any other place in the world. I thank you very much. Sheshe.